We can list off the things that Omar Aziz is. He's a lawyer, a writer, a former foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Trudeau, and currently he's a Radcliffe Fellow at Harvard University. But all of that may say very little about him, as his new book lays out in a frank and thoughtful rumination on what makes us who we are. The book is called Brown Boy, a memoir, and it brings Omar Aziz to our studio. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Steve.
Every time you've been on this program in the past, I think it's been on the satellite, so it's great to have you in the flesh here.
It's good to be here.
I'm going to open with a real chippy in-your-face question, okay?
Sure.
A lot of people write a memoir near the end of their lives. How old are you?
Well, I am in my early 30s, and it's a good question. I've gotten it before, Steve. What I'll say is, sometimes those of us who have lived from a different perspective, we see a lot of experience in a short number of years. That's the first point, right? The second point is, I actually started writing this as a novel. People might not know this, but when I was at Yale Law School, I fictionalized some of this. And the problem that I had was many editors didn't believe some of it. So I had to speak with authority, and I wanted to put my own story on the line and say, okay, this actually happened. And this is how it went down, and that I'm gonna show a story using my personal narrative, but talking about broader issues. So I would say that, yes, I am young, one could say, for writing a memoir, but I would submit there is wisdom and thought in there, and it will engage readers of different backgrounds.
I would sign on to all of the above. It really will. Let's do an excerpt from the book. Sheldon, if you would, bring this graphic up. My parents, immigrants and Muslims, were conflicted about how I should approach the world, to assimilate entirely or hold fast to my roots. I was torn within myself, trying to be two people at once, part of two cultures, finding acceptance in neither. So I boomeranged between invisibility and presence, between misperception and clarified reality, always trying to blend in, chameleon-like, with my environment. I had become a hyphenated man. No, I was the hyphen. That encapsulates so much in that one paragraph, so let's start from the beginning. You grew up in Scarborough, Ontario. Describe your childhood.
So my parents were immigrants from Pakistan. My father came in the 70s as a student. He was part of the great migration of people, the great immigration of people to Canada. My mother was a teacher from Murray in the villages of Pakistan up in the mountains. And they came to Canada, and I was born in 1990 in Scarborough General Hospital. And I grew up in a multiracial, multicultural upbringing in Scarborough. It was very diverse. That's what I remember about it. And I wrote about this in the Globe, but it was a very diverse working class, middle class environment. We didn't have a lot. We were far away from the center of Toronto, but we had each other, and we had love, and we had a lot of culture, and we had a lot of language and really good food as well. And I think it was in that environment where so many immigrant families were together. And Steve, it was a beautiful thing as I reflect on it, because my parents and I, like so many immigrant families, we were growing up together. I was growing up in this world, but so were they. They were in their 30s, 40s at the time, and they had come to Canada, and they were living their dream and trying to keep a roof over our heads and ensure that their kids would have a shot at a beautiful and better life. And I'm sitting here with you today, so I feel like they succeeded, and I constantly am thinking about Scarborough and my roots, no matter what room I'm in.
How were you caught between two worlds, betwixt and between, during your childhood upbringing in Scarborough?
Sure. So my father was quite secular and is quite secular, and he believed that we should assimilate. And my mother believes that we should stick closer to our roots and to our religion, right? So there was this kind of like almost an emotional back and forth between the two perspectives. And then I would go to the mosque as well. Mother would take us to the mosque. So I would wake up in the morning and I would be, say, a Canadian child going out into the world and going to school. And then at home, I would be more of a Pakistani child speaking Urdu with my mother and late grandmother, God bless her. And then I would go to the mosque and I would learn about Islam and religion, and I would rinse and repeat every single day. So I was living in multiple worlds even as a child, and I think that gave me a great appreciation for different people's perspectives and the diversity that we all carry.
It was a diverse neighborhood, to be sure, and yet you say, my childhood brain was only focused at all hours on keeping my English unaccented, my heritage undetected, my color unseen. How come?
Because I would go to school and I would feel very ashamed of who I was.
Why?
Because I was worried about the students making fun of my mother's accent. I was worried about my mother picking me up and wearing a shalwar kameez and that they would say something bad about her. I was worried about the children who were mostly white talking about her Paki dot, as they would say. I was worried about racial slurs. All I wanted to do was to fit in. And when you look different and you're a kid and you worship differently and you have a different name, that really stings you sometimes.
You were worried about all that, but did you run into much of that?
I did. I mean, there was obviously the schoolyard bullying and racial slurs like the word Paki, for example, which originates in neo-Nazi circles. I was called that. And even later on, I was dealing with it as well. But I think it was more of the shame and the guilt that I was carrying with me. And as I got older, I really wanted to interrogate and think about where that shame came from. Because when I learned more about my culture and religion, I learned that Islam is a beautiful religion, a beautiful history. Pakistan and India have a beautiful, long, syncretic history. Urdu is a beautiful language of poetry. So I would learn all these things, and I kind of felt like I had been duped. Like, who had believed this myth that, our languages and our accents and our cultures, that there was something wrong with them? So I think that maybe Canadian society at the time wasn't as prepared. Maybe it was more acceptable. We were different. We did look different. But I would say that those immigrants in Scarborough, my family, were as Canadian as they get.
2 years after 9/11, you moved to Mississauga, and you're now in high school, and you write, "I began to assemble my latest mask." What was the mask?
We all go through life trying on different identities, right? Especially as we get older. And for me, I was trying on these different masks, as I call them. And the mask for me when I got to high school was that I wanted to be a tough guy. I didn't want anyone to touch me. I was done having people make fun of me.
Omer, you're not that tall today. How big were you in high school?
I was stronger.
Okay. I was going to say, you playing the tough guy at 5 foot, not much, is, I don't know how you were going to pull that off.
Well, I mean, that's true. Although height is only a part of it, Steve, as you know, right?
Okay.
But I would say, look, in playing football, playing rugby, at the same time, Floyd Mayweather and Roy Jones Jr., the greatest boxers in the world, are not that tall either.
Not that big, that's
right?
true.
So it really matters how much spirit and energy that you have, right? Dr. King, Dr. Martin Luther King. Steve, it's something I've been thinking about, that the day my book came out yesterday was also the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination.
Yes.
So I've been reflecting and thinking about it. But, when you get to school, I wanted to not be pushed around and not bullied around. And it was a matter of presenting myself and taking on a new attire and trying to, stay away from the difficulties, but really not being bullied around anymore. I was done being a victim.
This book is quite a revelation, if I may say, for me, because I've only known you in your sort of post-academic life. You're a guy with 3 university degrees, including Yale, and yet you write, in 2006, the Toronto 18 were arrested. People will remember this. They were trying to bomb Parliament, behead Prime Minister Harper. And you write, "I quietly asked myself what sort of reality these boys had been living, and the answer came, they had been living mine. I just can't imagine you all in the same bucket."
Why not?
Well, for the reasons just stated. You are a well-spoken, highly educated, having worked in the Prime Minister of Canada's office. You, to me, don't seem to have anything in common with those other guys, and yet you kind of think you do.
Yeah, well, I did at 16. I was a brown boy in Mississauga, and my name was misspelled and misspoken by all the teachers, so I wasn't someone with a Yale Law degree at 16. I just got to school, and everyone was talking about Muslims, kids that we had gone to school with, becoming terrorists and planning these horrific attacks. And at the time, there was, again, a lot of fear. There was a lot of confusion. But you have to understand, Steve, when we're coming up, this is just a snapshot, right? That scene is just a snapshot. There's a longer arc and a longer journey. And I was a poor kid at school, by the way. I wasn't good at school, right? I got bad grades. I was apathetic. I was indifferent. And I was, in fact, the worst kind of student, which treated as a lost cause.
And yet, you turned out the way you turned out, and they clearly turned out the way they turned out.
Yeah, but if I
Why
made
did that?
Sure, but imagine, this is what I say, when you're a person of color in the West and even in Canada, to this day, you're walking on ice. What does that mean? If you do make a mistake, fine. These guys, they were really plotting something different. But if you make a mistake and the criminal justice system gets you, it's very likely that you're going to be stuck and caught in that system. So often, it's just a matter of a few degrees. It's a matter of a few missteps. And if you slip up, and I could have slipped up, but if you slip up, you might be done. And that's the difference.
You were fortunate to have watched television one day and seen somebody on the air who may have changed your life.
Yeah.
You want to tell us who that was?
Sure. So I got home from school one day and I was 17 years old and going into or starting 12th grade. So, very pivotal year in Canada for academics. And then the TV was on, my grandmother was watching, and there was a tall, skinny person named Barack Hussein Obama who was running for president of the United States. And I remember just being so captivated by that because I had never seen someone who looked like me, had darker skin, had a Muslim name, and was running, wasn't in entertainment or wasn't in these other fields or athletics, with all respect to them, but was running for president, running for chief executive of the United States. So I had to sit back. I was kind of shocked, actually. And I thought, I've never seen this. Someone so eloquent, well-read, who could have been a member of my family, frankly. And that changed everything for me. We talk a lot about diversity and representation. Until a child or a kid or a teenager sees someone that looks like them, resembles them, and is doing interesting things, their conception of the world rarely changes.
It's the old story. If you can see it, you can be it.
Exactly.
I've heard that so many times. Okay, you end up going to Queen's University in Kingston. You then spend a semester in Paris, where you write, "The past had finally overwhelmed my future." What is that a reference to?
Well, in Paris, I had this mental breakdown, actually. I had a very, very difficult mental breakdown in Paris, and I thought that all the goals I was chasing, and I remember in first year of Queen's, I'd worked very hard. I had a reverse culture shock because I went from a multiracial community to a white majority community. Obviously I was migrating social classes as well, and I felt very alienated there, and I wanted to leave Canada. And I went to Paris, and Paris was even more isolating. And I have a quote there from the great French-Algerian writer Albert Camus that if you can survive a year alone in a room in Paris, he says you can survive anything, basically.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happened. And then, I had this mental breakdown and depression, and I sort of lost all my motivation. I stopped going to class. I was very, very disheartened. I felt like, what was I doing all this for? Just to chase credentials and grades. And as I reflected on that while writing the book, Steve, I learned that many people of color and many minorities quietly suffer with mental health, with depression. It's not really talked about in our community either. You're just meant to be strong and meant to keep going on.
Is part of that because you don't think you're good enough for either world?
Maybe. There's just like a stigma, right? Like, you have to think about it. My father was born in 1952, which means that for the first 15, 16 years of his life, Pakistan was a new country. But what does that mean? My grandparents were colonized. My great-grandparents were colonized. This is just fact. What does that mean? Well, people will say, well, they were colonized in British India. What it means is you do not have authority over your own house. You can step outside into the world, you can think you have authority, but the white man, the British man, rules. He will tell you what to do, he will tell you whether you can get a job, whether you can serve in government. And that's what my grandparents and great-grandparents went through. That was a colonized generation.
But not you. You didn't go through that.
Well, we're all legatees and we're all inheritors, right? History doesn't start in 1989 or 1990, right? So my grandmother raised my father with the values she was raised with. My father and mother raised me with their values. And there's an intergenerational story here. And we can come back to this, but one thing about colonialism I do want to say, because we hear that word a lot and we hear about monuments and stuff, and I think, as I write about in the book, Steve, one of the great ills of colonialism was it ruptured the relations between father and son, mother and daughter, parents and children. What do I mean by that? When you're a father, when you're a parent, you're passing on stories, you're passing on wisdom. This is how you deal with the world. This is how the world works. But if outside you have no power, someone came from far away and into your house and says, this is now my house and I run it, how will your child react to that? It ruptured the authority that parents had. It ruptured the stories. It ruptured the links between parents and children intergenerationally. And that's why many of us who were even born here, we didn't have a sense of our roots or our history.
Do you not think, though, at some point, after Queen's, you went to Cambridge University, do you not think at some point, I'm here in kind of one of the most elite universities in the Western world, mingling happily among, white people?
Yeah.
Did you not feel accepted, or did you not feel I've arrived?
There's moments of arrival. There's feelings where you feel like you've arrived, but then something very quickly can snap you right back and remind you that you might want to, be a little restrained and humble in dealing with the world. So
Like what?
Well, there is a scene in this book where I go to London to write the LSAT, and something happens that might make people gasp in the book. while I'm going to write, after writing the LSAT, trying to chase my North American dream, trying to chase my meritocracy. So yes, I mean, you have moments of arrival, but at the same time, Steve, I'm not the person who can stand in an opulent room and think this is great for me, look how successful I am, I've come so far, when I know that my friends are struggling, when I know my community is struggling, when I know that my people are being shot at in their mosques, when I know that, crimes have been committed against us. We lived through an enormous amount of trauma. And when I come back to see my family and friends in Scarborough and Mississauga, yeah, it's great to celebrate, but I'm thinking about their concerns as well. I'm thinking about people who don't go to Cambridge. I'm thinking about people who don't go to Yale Law School. I'm thinking about people who are behind me in line at the customs line trying to go to the United States and are going to get pulled aside because I showed my blue passport and my Harvard badge. So yeah, I don't want to feel like I earned these credentials and now I have a different set of rules that apply to me. I don't think any of us are free until all of us are free, and I actually mean that.
What's the biggest difference between the guy who went to high school and the guy who sits here today, a graduate of Yale University?
I think one big difference is I'm more confident in myself. I've read a lot. I've spent time reading and learning. I've spent a lot of time writing. And I think that when you begin to equip yourself with knowledge, you have the tools to understand your world. You have language to describe your world. You have language to write about your world. And so people cannot exploit you the same way. People cannot take advantage of you the same way. When you have an ability to set the narrative as well and to tell a story honestly, right? Like to tell an honest story. As much as this book is about me and it's about the self, what I hope is it uses the tools of memoir to reveal something deeper about our society, right? Like I think we do have a lot of narcissism in our society and we do have a lot of me culture in our society. And yes, to go back to your first question, I am kind of young to be writing a memoir, but at the same time, if a personal story can't break through the barriers that separate us race, class, linguistically, ethnically, then what can? Right? Like I can sit here and make arguments all day long about what I believe, but what I really want to do is let me tell you a story and I hope it's a good story. And I think that you can bring people in, you can invite people who aren't from your background and you can share something because literature is so much more than just about race or ethnicity. It's about the community and the story that we're all building together.
You got to, I guess to a certain extent, fulfill a bit of a dream in as much as you're a pretty worldly guy for a 30-something guy, and you got to be a foreign policy advisor in the Office of the Prime Minister of Canada.
Yes.
Which is not a bad thing.
No.
Did that job live up to your hopes?
I mean, in some ways it did because I wanted to, I was at a law school and I really wanted to make an impact on foreign policy. I had a lot of ideas, as you can tell. I had ideas about China and One Belt, One Road. I had ideas about Palestine, how to solve that. I had ideas about Russia and Ukraine. I had ideas about NAFTA and the Trump administration, right? We were renegotiating NAFTA. But at the same time, I kept coming up against the same limited worldviews, right? This book charts a story of discrimination and racism that I experienced. I don't want to shy away from it. I have healed from it, I've grown from it, but what I will not do is whitewash it or play it down. It did happen, I know what happened.
Discrimination in the Prime Minister's office?
In the government, I want to say.
In the government of Canada?
In the government of Canada, at the highest levels, in the departments, among the civil servants, and yes, among some political staffers as well.
Okay, let's give some examples here. And you don't name names in the book, so I won't force you to name names here.
Sure.
You wouldn't anyway, I'm sure. But you're in meetings.
Yeah.
You're in high-level meetings. And there are older, whiter people in those meetings who cut you off all the time and who essentially tell you stuff that you're all too aware of. My question is this. How do you know that's a microaggression / racist moment and not a I'm 55, I'm 60 years old, you're a kid, I'm telling you because I know more than you?
Sure. I mean, well, that would be ageist, first of all. Actually, that's really interesting because ageism is something that I probably have to reckon with, but it's okay. At least that is something that we can get over. Racism is harder for me. It's a good question, though, Steve, and it's something that I really wrestled with. It wasn't like there was a racist incident and I was full of righteous indignation and I wanted to tweet. That's not really my personality. My personality is let me sit with this. Let me give this person the benefit of the doubt. And in fact, because I'm a lawyer, I would actually do this. I would go to my office and I would be steaming or I would be upset or hurt and I would close the door and I would open a Word document and I would write from the perspective of the person that I was encountering with and listing all the reasons why it wasn't racist. Maybe this person was upset that day. Maybe they had a cold the day before. There's so many different reasons. But ultimately, when something keeps happening, one time, second time, third time, fourth time, if you don't want to look at a pattern or if you want to be willfully oblivious, that's on you. But
okay, what if the pattern is you're the youngest guy in the room and therefore they're pulling rank on you, not being racist?
Well,
I don't know. I'm just asking.
Well, I mean, in terms of the civil servants, with all respect, I mean, they weren't reporting to me, but as you know how Ottawa works with political staff and civil service, there were 10,000 people in the Department of Foreign Affairs, and I could get a briefing from any single one of them if I wanted to, because I worked for the minister. So ageism shouldn't have been any part of the equation. But maybe they were like, who is this, brown guy from Yale Law School coming here? We've been working in this department for 50 years, and he's going to come and tell us what to do and what we should do. At the same time, I was there to do good work. I was there for a vision, and I was there because I believed, and we can talk about this, but I believed in the Prime Minister's vision in 2015. I championed that. I supported that. In writing, the very first person, I went out there and I campaigned and I supported that. But when I went inside the government, I saw that there were some social ills like racism that were impacting us. And what bothered me was that when we were in public, we were talking about diversity and inclusion, which is really important, but that in private, staffers, civil servants were saying and doing things which, again, in 2017 might be okay when I was working there. In 2020, the world has changed. If any of that stuff happened today and someone came out in public, it would be on the news, right? So I would say I really contended with the motivations, the perspectives of the people I was working with. But when I go to a party or a meeting or a gathering at a senior official's office, in their home, and that official hands me a garbage bag and then expects that I go clean up after people when I work for the Prime Minister of Canada, something to me sits very wrong with that.
And yet,
I must...
Omer, you took the bag and you cleaned up the garbage.
I cleaned it up
You didn't tell him to go stuff himself. You actually did it. Why did you do it?
Because I was raised well. I was raised well and told that, you need to serve the team. And that's not the moment when you have premiers and VIPs in the room. That is not the moment that I'm going to take to start an issue.
All right, well, let's
Sure.
do another moment here.
Let's do another moment.
This moment was really powerful in the book. You find yourself in the Prime Minister's office alone with Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
There were no hangers-on, no other aides in the room, which is a pretty rare moment for him because he's almost always surrounded by people. And you are having an inner debate. Do I raise some of these issues that you and I have been talking about for the last 5 minutes here? Do I raise some of this with him or not? And you ultimately decided not to. How come?
Because I thought that, Steve, this might be one of my weaknesses, that I often even want to protect and be kind to the people who did harm me. I'm not out here to cast aspersions on anyone's reputation. I'm not here to disparage anyone. But in that moment, it was me, and it was the big boss, Prime Minister Trudeau. And I thought I have two options, and Pierre Trudeau's portrait is right there carrying little Justin. And I thought I can either use this moment to bring up a workplace discrimination instances with the Prime Minister of Canada, and hopefully it will be handled because he's the top person in charge, or I can convey and communicate my gratitude for what this longer story was, which is that his father, Prime Minister Trudeau, the first Prime Minister Trudeau, opened the door for my family and so many immigrants to come here.
Or you could have done both.
I could have done both, but I didn't have that much time with him. And I thought, I can't bring up to the Prime Minister of Canada that there are staffers in his administration who are being racist towards me in one of our first interactions. And, and also that was a meeting about Burma and about a genocide that was happening among the Rohingya Muslims, which I advocated we should be calling genocide. It just felt like the wrong moment to make it about myself, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense.
Yeah.
No, I get it. I mean, you've got 10 seconds to figure out what you want to do here, and you made the decision you made. On the one hand, I totally understand it. On the other hand, if he is the genuine article, you deprived him of an opportunity to learn about something that was happening in his midst that he might have wanted to know about and do something about.
Yeah, true. But I did raise it to appropriate figures who have direct access to him and would brief him. And
You think they did?
Look, I think that it should have been their job to do it. If I'm not here to be a victim. I never want to be a victim. And I think that I don't appreciate or respect people who overly self-victimize. What I like is the truth. And I would hope that I was raising my concerns to the various chiefs of staff, and I was doing it deliberately, I was doing it with candor, and I was doing it with respect. And all I hoped was that it got to the top person and there was change. And when I determined that I couldn't make those changes and that I was being stymied and stifled, including stifled in the work that I came here to do on behalf of Canadians.
You left.
Because those offices, they don't belong to the Prime Minister or anyone else. They belong to Canadians. They don't belong to me or any of us. And I understood that I was there for a temporary time. And when I did leave, I made a request that my role be filled with a person of color. And I'm glad to say that request was fulfilled. At the same time, we have a lot of work to do to untangle the systemic racism that impacts our society at the leadership levels, including our government. And if you think of what the Canadian government is, for a long time, I mean, we're talking about history. Someone like me working in the Canadian government would have been nonsensical, right? I mean, what would I have been in charge of? They were running basically a colonial operation when it came to Indigenous affairs and other issues, and it just would not have been possible. So my story is a story of progress. At the same time, I want to ensure that we're expanding freedom and opportunities for other people as well. There's two kinds of people of color and minorities who get successful, and I call them the ones who pull the ladder up and the ones who push the ladder a little bit down. And I want to make sure that I keep, pushing the ladder down and helping and ensuring that I can do what I can to help others follow their dreams as well.
Can I get one more minute? I want to ask this last question. Can we do one more minute? Because I know I'm
Yes.
out of time. Okay, thank you, Lorraine. Let's finish here. You traveled to Pakistan,
Yeah.
to your mother's village.
Yes.
And I wonder, at the end of the day, what did that trip offer you and mean to you?
So I thought there was one trip left to make after all these trips in this book. And it was the one place I hadn't gone to, and I'd gone everywhere, right, basically. And it was to the village of Muddy. And I went there and I took a long flight and we drove up this winding road and I learned so much about my past, beautiful vistas. First thing I learned was that all the women in my mother's family were teachers. And that there were intergenerational links there, right? Aunties who had taught daughters, now the daughters had grown up, they'd become teachers. That was beautiful. Number two, the common wisdom of small town folk, whether it's in Canada, America, or Muddy. This might surprise people, but I actually get along and feel more comfortable with ordinary people who don't have Ivy League degrees than I do in Ivy League rooms. That's because of where I came from. And then finally, third, the colonial history. Muddy was the home of British colonial officers, summer retreats, so you had colonial buildings there, the Muddy Brewery. So again, it was an east-west meeting point right there up in the mountains, and I thought that was perfect and beautiful, and it made so much sense that I embody both east and west, and I'm sitting here today.
And I'm glad about that. Brown Boy, a Memoir is the name of the book. Omar Aziz, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for coming in today to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.